get started here. We are on page 40, excuse me, it's 47 in my book, but it's a little earlier on yours. It's lesson 10, and it is...
So it's 400? We did 41. Or
what?
400.
No, it's in your book it's page 41, yes. Lesson 10, the wilderness wanderings and the law. I know it's been a hot minute since we last discussed stuff, so let me just kind of get you caught up. Of course we have, I'm going to just redraw this map here. Funny, I can still kind of see. So this is the Mediterranean Sea. We've got the Red Sea, is something like this, kind of shaped like this. We've got the Nile, which ends in this great big delta over here. So this is the land of Egypt. And then way over here, and I think this should actually be a little bit higher, but I'm just going to draw it up here. You have what's called the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River leading down to the Dead Sea. This is the main landmark in Israel. Somewhere down here is the Persian Gulf. We don't really care too much about that, but figure it's worth drawing. So if you remember, way back in the days of Joseph, Joseph's brother sold him to slavery in Egypt, and he moved over there, and then by God's providence, he became the prime minister of Egypt, and had food when nobody else did, so his brothers eventually came looking for food, and when they found out that their brother was royalty, the whole family moved down to Egypt. And then 400 years passed, which, might I remind you, is a very long time. It's far longer than the entire history of the United States of America. Very long.
My grandpa's older than the U.S.
What's that?
My grandpa's older than the United States.
I don't know what your grandpa has to do with this. But in any case, after 400 years, a pharaoh arose in Egypt who did not remember Joseph and saw the Israelites as foreigners that had overstayed their welcome. So he enslaved them, he oppressed them, and Moses was raised up by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And so through Moses, God performed many incredible plagues against the Egyptian people to demonstrate his power. And in the end, finally, after the Passover, where the angel of death killed every firstborn Egyptian, but saved the firstborn of the Israelites. Quick quiz, how did the angel of death know to pass over an Israelite house? Yes?
Sacrifice.
What did you say, Daniel?
God.
God. Okay, a little more substantial than
Well,
that. What about a sacrifice, Everett?
Isn't it a sacrifice of an animal that's blood on the door? I can't
Yes.
remember what animal.
It was a perfect unblemished lamb. Very good. They had to kill an unblemished lamb. They would roast the meat and eat the meat, and they would paint the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. And then when the angel of death came through the land of Egypt, they would pass over the houses with the blood of the lamb covering the doorposts. And so the Jews from that day forward celebrated the Passover as the big celebration. In fact, that was how they numbered their months and their years. We number our years from the day Jesus was born, or at least that's how it's supposed to be. The Old Testament Israelites numbered their years from the day of the Passover. They celebrated Passover in the first month of every year. And anyway, that night they left Egypt, and God led them on a bit of a meandering path, and that kind of made Pharaoh mad that they weren't just leaving, and he decided to kill them all because his son had just died. And God led them to the shore of the Red Sea, and then part of the Red Sea, and they crossed over it, and that was your homework assignment, how the Red Sea fell on the Egyptians. And that's where we ended. But actually, I just realized I should maybe have made this a little bit better here. This landform ends up doing something like this. This is a peninsula. It doesn't come to a point, that's silly. But there is a peninsula here, and all of this is wilderness. It's very scrubby if there's any grass at all, but this is easily considered to be a desert. But a very important landmark in the desert is somewhere down here. There's a lot of mountains down here, so we don't know exactly which one it is. But down here is Mount Sinai. And who remembers why Mount Sinai is important? Not cyanide, Sinai. Who remembers why Mount Sinai is important? What happened on Mount Sinai?
Tablet.
We haven't gotten there yet, but that's very good. That does happen on Mount Sinai. What has happened on Mount Sinai that we've already discussed in this class?
Sacrifice.
Not sacrifice. Timothy?
Burning bush.
A burning bush,
I was
yes.
gonna say that.
Moses was shepherding for his father-in-law in this region, and Mount Sinai is where he encountered the bush that burned but didn't burn up. That was where God spoke to him, and God promised Moses that at the end of all of his affairs in Egypt, he would eventually make his way back to Mount Sinai and worship God on that mountain. And so that's what's going to happen at the beginning of our account today. So opening question in lesson 10 there. Who is your God? Whom do you trust to keep you safe and give you all that you need? We all want to feel safe and secure. What do people think will keep them safe and give them a good future?
Money.
Money. Yeah, very big one there. So we're going to call this gods. And I'm writing this with a little g on purpose. So we got money. What else do people trust to keep them safe and give them purpose and all that?
Alcohol.
Alcohol. Sure, yeah. I'll just...
Or a banquet.
Yeah. No, I'll just do it's ETOH. That's how we abbreviate alcohol chemically. Ethanol. Yeah?
Food.
Food. Sure, yeah, food. Anything else? Who hasn't gone yet? Timothy? What do you got?
Drugs.
Drugs. Okay, sure. I'm going to throw that out there with alcohol just because
Yeah.
they're basically related.
That's a great combination.
Alcohol is alcohol is a
Fentanyl.
kind of drug is what it is. And fentanyl will give you death really quick. Go ahead, Daniel. And it's fentanyl, not fentanyl. I hate when people-
Girls.
Girls, sure, yeah.
I'm afraid of women.
I'm gonna go ahead and write sex up here.
No!
That
We don't talk about
way, sorry if you find that offensive, but I don't think the girls who are watching are tempted by girls quite the same way as you are. At least they aren't quite that way.
What?
We're maybe not gonna get into that. So, but yes, these are generally what we consider to be the false gods of our culture. They are the things that people put their trust in. Money, drugs, food, sex, the things that you live for, the things that you want the most in life. In this lesson, we will see how God is training his people to obey and trust in him above all things. God alone will keep them safe and secure and give them a future. God gives us that same promise. So all of these you can kind of collectively say are less than the Lord. And I'll go ahead and put that in the small cap so you know who we're talking about there. The Lord, yeah. Who wants to read the orange box in the bottom of page 41?
You mean the red box?
Is it red in your book? I'm
It's a
going
little
to
red.
call that orange.
That's red. That's like pink.
Your face is like pink. Go ahead, Kaylee.
His face looks
God sets his people free from slavery in Egypt. And now Moses leads them into the wilderness, slowly heading towards the promised land. Very soon the people began to grumble against Moses and Aaron, saying they are thirsty and hungry.
Hold up there. Who's Aaron?
Aaron.
Aaron, yeah. Aaron. See here? Yeah, I've seen that skit. Who is Aaron?
Aaron. It's Aaron.
Yeah. So who is Aaron? Anybody know? Who's this Aaron guy? He just
No.
showed up on the orange box. Or the light pink box.
Aaron Rodgers for the New York Jets.
No, probably not.
I like
Aaron
that.
is
I like
Moses'
his
brother.
family.
Oh.
So Moses is not an only child. He has a brother and a sister. We've already seen his sister. Miriam is her name. Where have we seen Moses' sister? Do you guys remember?
Oh, when she married the guy.
No.
And then, oh, who was that?
I don't know what you're talking about. A lot of women marry guys. It's kind of like what they're into.
Last lesson, I think it was.
The last
When
lesson.
he got tricked to marry the other girl.
Oh, that was a while ago. That was Joseph's parents. Joseph's father had 4 wives, and 3 of them were given to him in ways he didn't really want. But that's good thinking. Moses' sister Miriam was told to watch over him when his mother placed him in a basket in the Nile River. So when Moses' mother couldn't hide him anymore, remember she put him in this waterproof basket, left him in the river. Well, she didn't just abandon him there, but she had to go and do grown-up stuff so she didn't look sus. And so she asked her daughter, Miriam, to watch the basket. And when Pharaoh's daughter opened the basket, Miriam was the one who was like, excuse me, I know of one of the Hebrew women who could nurse that baby. And so in that way, Miriam actually reconnected Moses with his mother, so that she could raise him without fearing for his life. So Miriam is important, and as an adult does some important stuff. But Aaron, Moses' brother, is chosen by God to basically speak on Moses' behalf. One of Moses' objections to God, way back when he spoke to him as a burning bush, was he said, God, I can't speak. I'm not a good speaker. And we don't know if he had a speech impediment or maybe a stutter or if he was just trying to weasel out of it. But God apparently took the objection seriously and said, okay, I will still send you, but I'll send you with your brother and he can speak for you. And Aaron would eventually become the high priest of Israel. Whereas Moses was the greatest prophet of Israel, Aaron was the first and highest priest of Israel. So the two of them are kind of the religious power family there, I guess you could say. Anyway, since Aaron is a co-leader with Moses, the people would often grumble against both of them together. This is very close to a strike, gentlemen. Okay. I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Kaylee. Please continue.
This is just the beginning of the complaints that God's people were. Oh my gosh, okay. At Moses and Aaron and God. God is patient, giving them quail and daily manna to eat and water to drink. Moses brings the Israelites to base the Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to God on the mountain while the people stay below. With cloud and smoke and fire, God renews his covenant with the people. He tells them how they are to live as his chosen people. God himself writes his law on 2 stone tablets, the 10 Commandments. The people grow impatient when Moses takes a little longer than they would like on the mountain with God. They break commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods. God is angry with the Israelites, but Moses intercedes for them, and God shows mercy.
Daniel, come sit up in front, please.
Everett, why are you talking?
Come on, move your stuff.
I can't. I'm sorry.
Alright, did you finish there, Kaylee?
Oh, 1 second.
Okay, listen to Kaylee, guys, or follow along in your boat, or both.
God told Moses and the people to build a sanctuary,
Tabernacle. Yeah, that's a silly word, but that's what it is.
where God will dwell with his people.
Very good.
Are you okay, Everett?
Mentally or physically?
Both.
Neither.
You have to answer that.
Okay, do notice the timeline at the bottom of page 41 where we have moved to about 1500 BC. Again, these times are not super precise, but it's very convenient to divide history into 500-year chunks and note which important Bible people were alive at that time. So Moses was alive in the year 1500 BC. But that doesn't mean anything significant happened that year. It just happens to be a convenient multiple of 500 before Christ. All right, so turn the page. We got a wall of text. Hooray! Love these walls of text. It gets a little better as we go along in our book, but
What do you mean by better?
but like there's less walls of text later on in the book. But anyway, it's a 2-page spread, so you might as well open them both up there. So we'll start with God provides. Not 2 months after the Israelites had been delivered by God from slavery in Egypt, they complained against Moses and Aaron, saying they wished they had died in Egypt rather than be hungry in the wilderness. God used the situation to test his people. Read or listen to Exodus 16. So turn your Bible to Exodus 16. We're going to break it into smaller bits. Are you already there? Exodus 16? All right.
I like that.
Awesome. I'm glad you are. Daniel, why don't you read Exodus 16 verses 1 through 5?
Bread from heaven. They set out from Elim?
Elim.
L-L-E-M.
Yeah, Elam's good.
And all the
It's probably Elim.
people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and
Sinai. The mountain.
Sinai.
So this is roughly Elim, and the story you're about to tell takes place around here, about halfway.
Okay.
On the
And they had departed from the land of Egypt, and the whole
Yep.
of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died on the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full for you, and brought us into the wilderness to kill us whole assembly with hunger.
Very good. That's a common expression. That quote there begins with "would that." People don't use it nowadays, so it's kind of an older expression. And it just means we really wish that this had happened. So they say, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt." That means we wish we had died in Egypt, because now we're just starving to death, is what he's saying, or what they're saying. This is Israel kind of as a collective. Verse 4, go ahead.
Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather the day's portion every day, and then I may test them, whether they walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, they went when they prepare and what they bring in, and it will be twice as much as they gather daily.
Very
As
good.
they gather.
And then we're going to jump up to verse 13. Who wants to read verses 13 through 15? Everett, you made eye contact with me. It's Exodus 16, verses 13 through 15.
Number.
Page 92.
$13 through 16.
15. Chapter 16, verses 13 through 15.
In the evening, Phil came up and covered the camp, and in the morning, dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of water,
Of the wilderness.
a fine flake, like thin was fine as frost on the ground. When people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to him, it is bread. The Lord has given to you to eat.
There you go. So here's a tent, and here's an Israelite come out of the tent in the morning. And what does he find? But not just the ground, but there is dew on the ground, as happens. You know, you get a layer of water or whatever on the ground. But then something strange happened. When the dew dried up, it left behind this flaky, powdery stuff, and it was thick enough that they could pick it up with their hands and look at it. And they asked a question. They said, "What is it?" And it turns out in Hebrew, the phrase "what is it" is manna. And so that's what they call it. They call this stuff manna. I'll write that down over here, manna, which means what is it? And what it was bread from heaven. And in this way, God fed the people of Israel all throughout their journey in this wilderness area, which is going to be quite long. So the people grumbled against God because they were hungry, and God provided food for them in a miraculous way, literal bread from heaven. And he gave them this bread every morning. But what Daniel read first was the evening before the first time manna came, God also caused quail to come to the camp. What is quail?
A bird.
Wild game bird.
It's a bird. Yes,
Wild game
quail
bird.
is a bird. So God
Wild
caused tons and tons of birds to just come and land right there in the Israelite camp. So you could just kind of walk up and grab one by the neck, and now you got supper.
Is that what they were?
So God provided them meat in the evening, and God provided them bread in the morning. And I'm not quite sure how often the meat came, but the bread was there every single morning. And the people were told to gather enough bread for that day, and then at the end of the day to throw the bread away. Why should they throw the bread away at the end of the day? I already told you about this, didn't I? Yeah.
Rotten.
Well, they don't know that it's going to rot. Why does God want them to throw it away at the end of the day?
He's gonna send more next morning.
He's going to send more tomorrow. That's right. You have no need to hoard this stuff, because God is going to keep on giving it to you. If you try to hoard it, then you're showing a lack of faith in God's promise. You're saying, I don't trust that God's going to feed me tomorrow, so I'm going to start storing it up today. And God says, no, take what you need in the morning. If you have extra, throw it out. So probably take more than you need in the morning and just throw it out in the evening. But don't save it, don't hoard it. And there was one exception. Did you notice? This is the part that Kaylee read. She said on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in twice as much as they gather daily. Why would they do that on the 6th day?
Holy day, next day.
Very good. The Sabbath is on the 7th day, and so God doesn't want them working on the Sabbath, and so He commands them to just work twice as hard on the day before the Sabbath, and then they could rest. God's covenant. Moses led the people to the base of Mount Sinai. They encamped around the mountain while Moses went up to talk with God. God renewed the covenant promise that He had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that Israel would be God's chosen people, that they would inherit the promises given to the patriarchs, that they would be a holy nation and a kingdom of priests, God calls them. What is a priest?
Pastor.
Well, what is a pastor?
Preacher.
A priest. That preaches.
Well,
A priest.
that's why there's a distinction between a pastor and a priest. A
Are they the
priest,
same thing?
they're not actually,
I
no.
thought they were.
In modern usage, they're very similar, but in biblical usage, there is a distinction. Suppose this is God up here, and suppose that this is us down here. The way to God before Jesus, this is like Jesus kind of blurs the lines a lot, which is why we don't make a huge distinction. But before Jesus, we could not directly approach God. This was not an option. Instead, we would have a priest. God Himself would appoint a priest, and it was His job to bring the sacrifices and praises and prayers of people to the Lord. So in Israelite worship, when you would sacrifice an animal, you would bring that animal to the priest. And the priest would slaughter the animal and cook it over the fire and eat some of the meat from it. And that was all part of God's system of worship. God had a different way of speaking to people. So as far as when God wants to deliver a message to people, what kind of person did He use for that?
Pastor.
Not a pastor.
A priest.
Not a priest.
Preacher.
It's a different office. I already said it once today.
Teacher.
Aaron was the high priest, and who
Oh, that one
was
fine.
Moses? No, a prophet.
An old man.
Oh, I said, that's what I meant.
Yeah, that's what you meant by mountain climber. So when we bring our
That's what I meant.
sacrifices and prayers to God, we do it through a priest. And when God wants to send a message to the world, He does it through a prophet. So Moses was the prophet and Aaron was the priest. But get this, God calls the whole nation of Israel a kingdom of priests. So that means that even though within the worship system He sets up, there's priests that do sacrifices and all that, but Israel themselves would have the privilege of things like prayer and personal worship and all of that. So God called Israel a kingdom of priests as a whole. And so also the church, the modern church, is a holy priesthood. The priesthood of all believers is what we call it in our theology.
It doesn't look very pleasant outside.
So the Old Testament priests acted as go-betweens or mediators between God and the people. Let's see, we're gonna skip all that. The Ten Commandments. Okay, so the Israelites have made the journey down to the base of Mount Sinai, and they camped around Mount Sinai, but they were not to touch the mountain. God's holiness descended on Mount Sinai, and His holiness would literally kill anybody, any person or animal that touched it. And so God actually appointed Israelites to guard the base of the mountain to keep people from touching it accidentally. Presumably they wouldn't touch it on purpose, but anyway, they had that job. The only people who actually went up the mountain were Moses and his right-hand man, his assistant, whose name was Joshua. That is the same Joshua after whom the book of Joshua is named. So Moses and Joshua went up the mountain, but even halfway up the mountain, Moses left Joshua behind, and he alone communed with God on top of the mountain. God showed His presence with thick clouds, thunder and lightning, smoke, fire, and a loud trumpet blast. The people's sinfulness prevented them from approaching God directly, but God spoke to them through an intermediary, Moses. Through Moses, God gave His law to the people. So over there we have the kingdom of priests and then the prophet Moses. And God's law is often depicted in art as 2 tablets of stone, which they were. We don't know what they look like, but they're often depicted like that because it looks nice, I guess. And if you really want to split hairs, usually the first 3 commandments are written on 1 tablet because they are the ones that deal with our relationship to God. You shall have no other gods, you shall not take God's name in vain, and you shall remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And then the other tablet has the 4th through 10th commandments, which deal with our relationships with other people. Honor your father and mother, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't give false testimony against your neighbor, don't covet your neighbor's stuff, don't covet your neighbor's relationships. Question, Daniel.
Would saying on God, would that be like saying his name in vain?
On God?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
it kind of is.
Huh?
Like saying on God.
Like people say like, oh, I didn't do that on God.
Oh, that's shorthand for I swear to God.
Yeah.
That is taking God's name in vain, yeah. That's also swearing likely falsely, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that people who say on God or I swear to God are habitual liars, and they figured out that people are slightly more likely to believe them if they add a swearing to God to their lies. So that's what they do. So if somebody says I swear to God or on God, you probably should see that as a red flag that you can't trust this person very much.
Or they are like.
Daniel's a little guilty of that.
Well, my statement stands. Exodus 20 is where the 10 Commandments are given. We're going to skip over that. We're going to spend a lot of time next year for you 6th graders, or we spent a lot of time last year for you old people talking about the 10 Commandments. So we're not going to rehash them there. Yeah, the 10 Commandments were written by the finger of God himself on 2 tablets of stone. Oh, very good. There's an illustration at the bottom of page 42 of those 2 tablets of stone. And just like I said, you got 1, 2, 3 on 1 tablet and then 4 through 10 on the other.
Why would they put like?
Why didn't they do it in a balanced fashion?
Yeah.
Because the first 3 are commandments about God, and the last 7 are commandments about our relationships with other people. So there's a very distinct division between them. It just isn't 5 and 5. Let's see here. We often talk about the 2 tables of the law, commandments 1 through 3, commandments 4 through 10. And we've already answered that question. How are they different? Now we get to read about the golden calf. So when Moses and Joshua went up on Mount Sinai, they were up there for 40 days and 40 nights. It was a very long time. So the people down at the base of the mountain, they kind of got a little impatient. They started to wonder if Moses was even alive. Maybe he went up there and died. They were terrified of this mountain because before God called Moses up, God actually spoke to them from the mountain, and his voice was so loud and his presence was so terrifying that they covered their ears and begged him to stop and begged Moses to go talk to God for them. So they actually asked for a prophet. God was speaking to them directly, and it was a horrifying thing for them. And so God chose Moses to receive the message out of all of them. So they go up into this, or Moses goes up into this terrifying mountain. He's gone for over a month, and the people are like, man, maybe he's dead, And so they make a golden calf. We're not going to read Exodus 32, sadly, in the interest of time management. But the Israelites grew tired of waiting for Moses to come down. They started to doubt God's promises to them, and they demanded that Aaron, their high priest, that Aaron build an idol to lead them. Aaron caved and gave them what they wanted, making a golden calf out of their own jewelry. Where did all of these slaves get gold jewelry? You guys remember this?
Yep.
How'd they get it from Egypt, Tim?
Theft, slavery.
Not theft, nope.
The store?
I'm not sure. Not the store.
Wait, Joseph.
Not Joseph. No, it's been 400 years. Any wealth that Joseph accumulated has been gone for a while.
The pyramids?
No, so here's what happened. God told the Israelites, I think this is really cool, and I wish they'd talk about it in Sunday school. The night before the plague of the firstborn, God told the Israelites to simply go to the Egyptians and ask them for stuff. They say, we're going to go on a trip. Can you please get me some stuff? and God granted the Egyptians a spirit of generosity. And they were like, oh, of course, here, take all of this stuff. You're going to need it. It's a long path, you know. We're going to take real good care of you guys. And while God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, he gave very soft hearts, you might say, to like everybody else in Egypt. So they were very generous to the Israelites. And God actually said, in this way I will plunder the nation of Egypt. Plundering is what you do when you conquer a town and then you go through all the houses and take all the valuables. So God said, I'm going to plunder Egypt, but not the normal way. They are literally just going to give you their stuff if you ask nicely. Say pretty, pretty please. And that's probably not in the original Hebrew. But yeah, that's where they get all this stuff. And then what do? They make a false god out of this golden jewelry. They build a calf and they coat it with gold. So it's not a solid gold calf, but it's an image of a calf, which was a very common idol in those days. They would make a statue of a calf and then worship it as a god. And yeah, so they made a golden calf out of their jewelry. And God was very upset and told Moses that he wanted to kill those people. He said, I'm going to kill them all, and I will make you a great nation, Moses, and then you'll be the bearer of my promise. And it was Moses' prayer, God, please don't do this. Don't kill them all, because then everybody else is going to say that you brought them out of Egypt just to kill them all in the wilderness. So for the sake of your name, your reputation, don't kill them. And God says, fine, I won't, I guess. So when Moses came down and saw the people worshiping the calf, he burned it. Remember I said it wasn't solid gold, it was gold plated. He burned it, he ground up the gold into dust and threw it in a body of water and made the people drink it. Drink the dust and the ashes and all that. So very, very bitter. But that was basically his punishment to the people. What are some times when we grow impatient with God or doubt his promises? You ever gotten impatient with him? Yeah?
When you pray for something and it doesn't happen.
We pray for something and it doesn't happen. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. What does that mean? Does that mean God's not listening to your prayer?
No.
What does it mean when you pray for something that doesn't happen? He's probably busy. No, it ain't that.
He's answering other people's prayers.
Not even that. No, he answers your prayer.
Maybe
But
like you don't need it.
sometimes the answer is no. Not even that you don't need it. God gives you tons of stuff you don't need because he loves you. But there are some things that you ask for that would actually not be good for one reason or another. And you might not understand why it wouldn't be good, but God does. And so God answers our prayers in his wisdom, and we submit our will to his will, and we trust that even when we think there is no downside to what we're asking for, we ultimately trust that God knows what he's doing when he says no to our prayers. But make no mistake, God answers every prayer. It's just sometimes the answer is not what we would like it to be. Otherwise you'd just be a spoiled brat. Your parents don't give you everything you ask them for, I hope. So.
Oh yeah. Can I use the restroom, please?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, well, actually I can't really take a break. Sorry, make it quick.
What time is it?
1 minute break. 4:34.
Yeah, 1 minute break.
Huh?
A 1 minute break.
1 minute break, yep.
Can I get a Kool-Aid?
Kool-Aid, I don't think there's any left.
Yeah, there is.
Tim said he got the last one.
I got the last blue one.
Run. You better be back here before Daniel is. Oh, you got the last blue one. That's what you were saying.
Sadly.
Okay. Well, hey, there is a map in your book that's probably better than the one that I drew. Actually, it looks like the only difference is the Persian Gulf should be longer and skinnier. Something like this.
Aw, you got the last bar.
No, there's one more.
That might not be the Persian Gulf. I should really check a real map before I start talking about things I don't know.
Open so.
In any case, all right. I didn't tell Everett I'd wait for him. All right, come on back. So now we're going to talk about what happens next. While they are at Mount Sinai, God tells the Israelites to build a portable temple, a place of worship for himself. And this is actually where the Israelites are going to be worshiping for the next 500 or so years. It's a very durable tent, I guess. And it has a special name. It's called the Tabernacle. So we have made it onto page 43 now in your workbook. Really, Daniel? You're putting sweetener, not even sugar. That's like sugar on steroids on your bar.
You should turn a Hulk right now.
Alright, so I'm going to read about the tabernacle here on page 49. Actually, let's have somebody else read about the tabernacle. Timothy, we haven't heard from you in a while. Go ahead and read the heading, the tabernacle.
Did you know, Quinn? Did you know?
No, underneath that. We'll come back to the did you know.
Okay, read or listen to Exodus 25, 1 through 9.
We're skipping that, but go ahead.
God told Moses to build a sanctuary in which he would dwell, and the people voluntarily gave towards moving it. God was present everywhere, with a promise to be found in the tabernacle. Skim through Exodus 25 through 47. God gave specific instructions about the tabernacle. It was going to be built, and first, God included his instructions for the building the temple with a command to keep the Sabbath. Read or listen to Exodus 31, verse 12.
Through 17.
What was the Sabbath? What did God want the people to keep it?
Okay, so let's actually read that one. Turn to Exodus 31. So the thing with Exodus, the first half of Exodus is a very riveting story of conflict and God helping his people and their great journey to Mount Sinai and all of that. The second half of Exodus is like something that an architect would love. It is extremely detailed plans for exactly how the tabernacle would be built. But they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so in your workbook on page 43, there is a fairly good picture of the tabernacle set up there.
What are they doing there?
What's that?
What are they doing there?
They very good question. They sacrifice animals on that outdoor altar there with the smoke rising up. So they would slaughter the animal outside of the fence, I believe, and then bring its carcass in and burn it on the altar. Huh?
Or they wouldn't eat it?
Cook it on the altar. Yeah, they would eat it. They burn the fat. God said, "All fat is the Lord's." I think that's Deuteronomy 3:16.
Wait, so the Lord eats the fat?
No, the Lord, they burn the fat as an offering to the Lord.
Oh.
Yeah, but I like to say that's why I put on so much weight.
What if God's hungry?
What if God's hungry? God doesn't get hungry.
If he eats your fat, then we understand.
The sacrifices that God demanded of the Israelites were in no way for his own benefits. It was actually to benefit the priests. It was how the priests got their payment, because they didn't get land. Later on, when they get to the promised land, they divide it up according to the 12 tribes of Israel, but the tribe of Levi gets no land. Instead, the tribe of Levi gets a few cities, and the Levites get their sustenance from the sacrifices that the people bring. Because there are not just sacrifices of meat, there are sacrifices of bread and grain, there's sacrifices of drink, there's sacrifices of lots of different things. And there was enough that the Levites could, I would assume, they could sell and or trade some of the sacrifices to get things like clothing, etc. But anyway, so the tabernacle, there's a good picture of it there at the top of page 43. Notice that those piles outside of the fence, that is not supposed to be like the tents where the people live. That's where stuff is stored. If you look out in the distance in that picture, and you can see way off, stretching to the horizon, there are these collections of tents. That is where the people lived. You got to remember there was
Is there like a tornado there on the picture?
No, that's smoke. I don't know what the other.
What's the other?
Oh, the other thing is the pillar of cloud. I bet.
What's that?
So So God indicated his presence to the Israelites by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night.
Wait, that's an actual cloud?
Yeah, like a literal
What
pillar
if
of
you
cloud.
went inside of it?
That it's the presence of God, so you probably die. But I think the cloud normally would be above the camp, and it would only come to rest when it was time to set up camp. And where it came to rest would be where they would set up the temple or the tabernacle, and then they would set up camp around it. It was actually kind of neat because it would be shaped like a cross. So you'd have the tabernacle in the middle. Oh, come on, green.
What
You have the tabernacle in the middle, and then there would be 3 camps to the north, and 3 camps to the east, and 3 camps to the west, and 3 camps to the south. But the larger tribes happen to be in the south. So you actually end up with a formation that from above looks very much like a cross. Yeah, and then right in the middle is the tabernacle, which had a small tent in the middle of it, or at the back of it, I should say. Blah.
How did they kill the animals?
I don't know, they didn't strangle them, they weren't allowed to strangle them, that was in God's law. But they probably used a knife and slit their throats, or something like that. You know, they did it humanely as possible, which is why God forbade strangling them, because strangling an animal is inhumane. There are better ways to kill them.
Why could they strangle the birds then?
Oh, you know, that's funny. I probably shouldn't have said that. Yeah, they probably didn't strangle the quail. That was just something stupid that I said because I was being illustrative.
They don't actually pay attention.
Yeah, I know. That was a great question. I think you caught me. You caught me screwing up. Good job. 1,000 points, Daniel. What's that, Everett?
Give me 1 point, like my daily points
Just
back.
put them in water.
Chunk.
Oh, like drowning them? I don't know. God doesn't specifically say how to kill them. I think putting them in water might have been difficult because they were in a desert climate, so they probably don't have a lot of water to drown animals in. So, yeah, probably slitting their throats. Anyway, all right, Exodus 31, verses 12 through 17. Daniel wants to read it. Go ahead, Daniel. Yep, starting at verse 12. The heading says the Sabbath.
The Sabbath. And the Lord said to Moses, You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, Above all you shall keep my Sabbath, for this is the sign between me and you through all generations, that you may know that I, the Lord,
sanctify
you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it will be put on death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among its people. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations. You're not governed forever. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days of the Lord he made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed.
Very good. So this is one of several places where God tells the Israelites they are to do no work on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of rest. Why is it significant to rest on the 7th day? Who rested on the 7th day first? God did, that's right. There were 6 days where God created the world, and on the 7th day he rested and admired his work. So also he does not want your life to become one of continual non-stop busyness, the rat race, I think is how they call it nowadays. But he wants you to take a break from being busy and just rest on the Sabbath. Here in America we get 2 Sabbaths. We get the Saturday and Sunday that we don't work, although typically we'll spend one of those days on like housework or what have you. But it's good to take a day to just rest. Huh?
I farm. How does that work?
You farm? Yeah, so obviously your animals need to be cared for, so that's not considered work. But maybe like, if you are a farmer who butchers animals, you don't do any butchering and you don't try to sell any meat on the Sabbath. But you still feed your animals, you gotta give them what they need to live.
You still have to feed Daniel.
Daniel's mom has to feed Daniel even on the
No, my
Sabbath.
dad.
That's part of their job, his mom and dad's job. What'd you say, Timothy?
What about flipping a light switch?
Yeah, so modern Jews have kind of taken Sabbath law to ridiculous extremes, and yeah, I believe it stems from the idea that you can't start fires on the Sabbath, which is not. I think that is in the Bible that you can't light a fire on the Sabbath. But modern Jews have interpreted electricity usage to be a form of fire starting, and so they're not allowed to turn on lights on the Sabbath. Instead, what they will do is turn on lights right before the Sabbath. The Sabbath begins at sunset on Friday and lasts until sunset on Saturday. That's their midnight. And so they'll actually turn on any lights they want to use before sunset on Friday and just leave it on for 24 hours.
Wait, but what about how would they sleep?
You don't turn on your bedroom light, I guess. You wait for sunlight to illumine your bedroom. But yeah, it's like some of the richer Jews that I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, a pretty wealthy Jewish neighborhood for a lot of its residents, and a lot of them had a whole separate set of appliances to use on the Sabbath that you weren't supposed to cook your unleavened bread Sabbath food on the same surface as your regular food, so they had a separate oven and stove for that. And they would even have their refrigerators on a schedule where the light doesn't turn on when you open the door on the Sabbath, because then that would be.
That's extreme.
It is extreme, yes. It's kind of the tradition of the Pharisees of Jesus' day, who really kind of blew God's law out of proportion. But we'll talk about why that is later on in this course. Let's see. So one very important thing that the Israelites built in the book of Exodus is called the Ark of the Covenant. There's a blue box at the top of page 43. Who would like to read the contents of the blue box? Go ahead, Kaylee.
The Ark of the Covenant, the most holy piece in the tabernacle, was a box covered with golden
And
adorned
adorned is that word, yeah.
cherubim with wings that covered the ark. It had 2 poles so it could be carried, and contained the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, a jar of manna, and Aaron's rod. The ark received the blood of sacrifice made on the day of atonement, which pointed to the ultimate and final sacrifice of Jesus Christ for the sins of the world.
Very good. So the Ark of the Covenant was called the mercy seat. It was the literal throne of God in the world, and it was an ark covered with gold. Inside of the ark was, as Kaylee said, that the original tablets of stone. Well, the original ones Moses broke in a fury because the Israelites were worshiping a gold staff. But he went back up the mountain and God gave him a copy, a different original. And those 2 tablets of stone were placed inside the Ark of the Covenant, inside a box, as well as a staff. So at one point, Aaron's high priesthood was questioned. Was Aaron really God's chosen high priest? And to establish that credibility, God told all of the tribes of Israel to appoint an elder that they think should be the priest, and to take a staff and lay it on the ground. And Aaron will also lay his staff on the ground. And then the next day, Aaron's staff had produced flowers and buds, and the others had not. And so that was how God demonstrated that Aaron was actually the high priest that God had chosen for the nation of Israel. The Ark of the Covenant was carried on 2 long poles like this. There were little hoops built into the edges that the poles would slide through. So it was actually, I don't want to mix my red and black, but it's like 1 long pole on each side there. And they were carried by Levites. It was a very heavy box. So there were 12 Levites, 12 people of the tribe of Levi, 12 priests, 3 on each pole, I guess you could say, that sticks out from the end. And they would carry it on their shoulders as they went along. And that was one of the only things inside of that building in the tabernacle. So if you look at that picture of the tabernacle, most of it is an outdoor fenced-in area, but there's that one big tent. Inside of that big tent was called the Holy Place. It was where priests would go to perform special acts of worship. And then a separate room in the tent was called the Most Holy Place, also known as the Holy of Holies. So you might have heard of the Holy of Holies. That's that is where the Ark of the Covenant is, and that is the physical place where God dwelt with his people. You know, we say that God is everywhere, but we also recognize specific times and places where God is uniquely physically present. In our day and age, it's in Holy Communion, in the sacrament of the altar, where Jesus is seated on the altar with his body and blood. In the Old Testament, it was the Ark of the Covenant, where the presence of God, the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, would come to rest on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And once a year, the high priest would enter the most holy place and sprinkle the blood of a special sacrifice onto the Ark of the Covenant, and the blood of that lamb would cover the sins of Israel. All of that is foreshadowing what God would accomplish in Jesus. Okay, let's keep going here. We've got 10 minutes. The spies and 40 years of wandering. So now we're jumping from Exodus. I mentioned the second half of Exodus is basically architectural designs for the tabernacle. The book of Numbers is actually where the story kind of picks up again. And we're not going to read this, sadly, but basically God commands. In the book of Numbers, it starts off with a census. The people of Israel are counted, and that becomes important later. And then they journey up to the Promised Land. And it's actually a fairly short journey. And for geographic reasons, they actually come at the Promised Land from the east, like this. So crossing the Jordan is kind of a big deal. And before they crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land, they did have a couple of battles where God protected them and gave them victory. But before they entered the Promised Land, God told them to send 12 spies to go into the Promised Land. And for 40 days, the spies kind of journeyed around, and they took note of where the towns were, where the cities were, what kind of land they were getting. And when they came back, they reported two things. One, they said that the land is a land flowing with milk and honey, and they brought back a cluster of grapes that was gigantic, just to show the people that, these clusters of grapes aren't even rare. They're everywhere. This is an incredibly prosperous land. But the people living in this land are very large and powerful, and we felt like grasshoppers next to them. They were so big and so strong. And so of the 12 spies, 10 of them gave a bad report of the land and said, yeah, sure, there's food, but we're going to get slaughtered if we try to take this land. God wants us to conquer this land like in a battle. We can't handle that. And it was only two spies that gave a good report on the land. And their names were Joshua, yes, that Joshua, and Caleb was the name of the other spy that gave a good report. They were like, yeah, God's going to give us this land. Isn't that awesome? But the majority of the Israelites sided with the 10 who gave a bad report. And they were angry at Moses, angry at God, and they said, you know what, let's just appoint a different leader besides Moses and have him lead us back to Egypt, because we're better off as slaves in Egypt than we are dead in the so-called Promised Land. And they talk about how, we're going to get killed and our children are just going to die in the wilderness and all this stuff. And God, this is the last straw for God. The people have been so rebellious and unfaithful and complaining all through this journey. And God says, I'm done. That's it. He says, every adult who doubted me here, every adult who said that they're going to die in the Promised Land, they're going to die in the wilderness. So God told the Israelites to turn right back around and go back into the wilderness and wander around the wilderness for 40 years, following the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. For 40 years, the whole nation of Israel wandered until every adult, everybody over the age of 20, when that census was taken, everybody over the age of 20 who doubted God would die in the wilderness of so-called natural causes. And then a new generation, the kids and grandkids of the unfaithful generation, a generation who knew nothing but full dependence on God with the constant stream of manna and water coming miraculously from a rock and all this other stuff. that generation would learn what it means to trust in God, and that generation would actually get to enter the promised land. And so that's what happened. The people were right on the threshold of the promised land, and they doubted God. Even though they had seen him destroy the army of Egypt, they thought a bunch of barbarians living in the promised land would stop them. And God was like, I'm so sick of these people. You're going to go back out in the wilderness, because the people said, we're going to die in the promised land, and our kids are going to die in the wilderness. And God said, actually, you're going to die in the wilderness, and your kids are going to live in the promised land. And so that's what ends up happening there. And that's more or less where the narrative portion of this ends. There's a little bit on each of the 3 other books in the Torah besides Genesis and Exodus on page 43. Leviticus is a very detailed description on the worship life of Israel. So if you're confused about these sacrifices or you want to learn more about it, you read the book of Leviticus and you'll understand how Israelite worship was set up. Numbers, as I mentioned, covers everything after Mount Sinai. So Numbers includes the bit with the spies and a lot of different things that happened during the 40 years of wilderness wandering. Covers the death of Miriam and the death of Aaron. And Deuteronomy is literally means second law. And Deuteronomy is the end of the journey. They have come back to the promised land. Moses is now an old man, and he knows that he's not going to enter the promised land. So he gathers all of the younglings around, all of the generation that has learned faith, and he goes over the law with them a second time. That's why Deuteronomy means second law. So Moses teaches the law one more time, and then at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses goes up onto a mountain on this side of the Jordan, and he looks out, and God shows him the promised land, and then Moses dies. And Moses' assistant, Joshua, remember one of the only 2 faithful spies, Joshua is made the new leader of God's people. And his exploits are covered in the book of Joshua. Turn the page in your workbook. We got just a moment here. In whom do you trust? We usually think of the 10 Commandments and God's law simply as God's demand on us. Do this, don't do that. But God's law teaches us that he wants to be our God and our only God. He wants to free us from the evils of the world, and he wants to provide us with all that we need. Martin Luther's explanation of the first commandment, you shall have no other gods, is this: we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. Look back at this lesson. What difference would it have made if the Israelites had feared, loved, and trusted in God above all things? What things might be different if the Israelites feared, loved, and trusted in God above all things?
It would be good.
It would be good, actually. Lots of not good things. If the Israelites actually feared, loved, and trusted God above all things as they should, what are some things that might have gone differently?
It would have been way cleaner. Way better.
It would have been better, yeah. Does anyone have any better ideas than that? All of this 40 years of aimless wandering in the wilderness, waiting for the old people to die, that wouldn't have happened, because the old people would have gotten to go into the promised land, and the whole plan could have been moved up a generation if the people had feared, loved, and trusted God above all things. The people, God gave them manna and quail, even though they were grumpy and whiny about it. But the people probably would have found a lot more joy in the bread from heaven if they feared, loved, and trusted God above all things. They certainly wouldn't have made that stupid golden calf and worshipped that at the base of Mount Sinai. And there's a lot of other accounts of unfaithfulness that we didn't get to talk about that would have gone differently. Basically, God would have been much happier with the Israelites, and the Israelites would have been much happier with their lives if they had feared, loved, and trusted in God above all things. So then what about you? What difference would it make in your life if you feared, loved, and trusted in God above all things? Write down your thoughts below. We don't have time to do that, so I'm just going to leave that as an exercise for you and hand out your homework.
Yeah, my
It's right here.
Skippy Ohio Gabbard.
Yeah, nobody's impressed with the skivvities. Alright, here is your memory help.
You're so fun.
Notice the books on the Bible on the back. And then I've got your actual homework assignment too. We do meet next Wednesday, Lord willing, so be prepared for that.
What's that?
Oh yeah, you guys get memory quizzes.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is an easy one.
Yep. And then homework assignments all around. So there's homework for you and you and memory help.
know this.
So put your memory help in a part of your backpack that you can easily access. And look at it when you're on the bus or in the car or
Ride the
walking,
bus.
however you get to and from school. Study your memory verse there. And then note there's books of the Bible in the back as well. So you can study those too. Are you done turning this in? All right, I'll allow it. Yeah, you're missing, like, it looks like you're missing the entire last question.
Alright.
All right, let's close with Luther's evening prayer. Sorry, Kaylee.
It's okay.
Ready? I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously kept me this day. And I pray that you would forgive me all of my sins where I have done wrong, and graciously keep me this night. For into your hands I commend myself, my body and soul, and all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. Amen. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.